Hello everyone, I am back with an update and I'm going to do like an everything update, but mainly, we'll get to the reading for sure. And let's see, everything's going well. I am being a retired person and officially starting to deal with all the bureaucracy that has to do with that, mainly switching over my healthcare to paying for the same healthcare I had when I was employed, which I want to do because it's good coverage and I don't really have the desire to go looking for something else that might be cheaper. I'm just going to do that. I think it's called, you may be familiar with the term COBRA. Anyway, so that's that. And then in terms of my health, it's been fine. I had a lumbar steroid shot on last Thursday, and it was quite painful because it hit close to the nerve. It was really kind of like, oh gosh. Anyway, but everything was fine except what happened was, and it's im Nachhinein, so after the fact, it's not such a big deal. But so I've had this happen before, and so it did happen again. And so what happens is I'll get sort of palpitations and pain and breathlessness. And the minute you mention those signs of the symptoms, you get said you should go to the ER. And I was like, do I really need to go? I was pretty sure it wasn't anything much, and I was kind of right. But I did go to the ER on Friday, and the minute you check in with those symptoms, and it was very empty when we checked in, and everyone was very nice, and they just do the whole shebang of EKG and lots of blood tests and an x-ray, and none of it came back with anything too concerning, except some of my blood values were off because, basically from what I gather, because of the steroids. And then I had like high glucose, but they said, well, it's just because you had something to eat. I'm like, I'm not sure about that. And then even the palpitations, there was some kind of indication that I had them, but it all calmed down. And so they weren't concerned. I wasn't having a heart attack or anything. And so I guess it's a known side effect of steroids that you get this kind of your racing heart, kind of a fast heartbeat. And so it's fine. Everything's fine. And I feel kind of not exactly that it's ridiculous because you got to get it checked out. So I'm trying to just kind of, but I did notice how that throws you off too, that kind of the stress of just going there and being taken care of and people worrying about you, and then it's a small town, so I'm in my little gown going to the restroom. I see people I know, I'm like and they're like, are you okay? I'm like, yes, I'm fine. It's just it's and if you're sort of nervous or anxious or also sensitive like me, that event itself becomes stressful. The sort of dealing with it in the after, and even just, I think for me, the whole calling attention to myself, and I thank goodness I didn't need an ambulance. It was just Bill was the ambulance, and it's all fine. And of course, it's probably going to cost a pretty penny, but it's all fine. And I'm glad we have a nice little hospital in town that was able to deal with this, and it was fine. And since then, I'm just kind of recovering from that event. And in a way, the steroid is kind of helping. I do have less pain. I still have some issues. But basically, I am less full of pain. And now I just kind of got to get over the whole ER thing. And even the procedure, it being uncomfortable, which, I mean, it's a week out now, so over a week, so it should be fine. And trying to settle into a nice routine. I'm being pretty lenient on myself about pushing to be more active. I'm still kind of doing the thing where, well, I'm being active in terms of cleaning the house more, and also trying to pay attention to pacing, like if I do something, then resting, rest, do something, as opposed to do so much that I have to kind of burn out rest, as opposed to just, and also this idea of preemptive rest, so that then you're not sort of worn out. And that's all. It's all a work in progress. There's a lot of good online stuff. There's even a class I could take for that. And then the other issue I am dealing, and of course steroids don't help here. If you know, you know. Sleeping it's getting better. At the beginning, the steroids are like, you just don't sleep, or you're just not sleepy. And now it's a little bit better. And the good thing is that I feel, despite all these mild issues, kind of relaxed about the future because of retirement, because I don't have the semester looking at me. And I know that in the past, I've used the anxiety of the impending semester to become really highly organized and think about my first day outfits and plan everything really well, and that kind of like tunnel vision of planning. And I don't have to do that. It's kind of interesting. I'm enjoying that I don't have that kind of impending big change happening. Instead, I have sort of the beginning of the fall and my September, my birthday month, and a kind of more slow unfolding of the year, which I am definitely looking forward to. So that's that. Now moving on into reading. So the main book that I've been trying to get through and read and enjoy, and I have been enjoying it, except it's for reasons that'll become clear, slow down a bit, since I've come home on the 7th of July, and today's the 1st of August, is Hild. So Hild, the beautiful fictional account of the Saint Hild of Whitby, and I guess what are we in? We're in the 7th century Britain, so early medieval depiction of this woman's life, and it's really quite well done. It's very evocative of the it's very sort of vibey in terms of the world that is evoked in terms of 7th century. And then Hild is a child basically, and she's obviously very smart. She has a smart but also kind of manipulative mother, and she herself has visions, or is a seer. And my sense is that she's just someone who, she does have these visions, she does sort of see things, but it's not exactly clear if it's just sort of an imagination or what's going on with that. I mean, it's not clearly set up that it's magic or something, which is quite well done, I think. It's not a quick read, and I have to sort of check things, and all the references to things to do with even the names of people are very strange and unfamiliar. I like the narrative. I like how it's unfolding and how she's growing up, and we see her sort of slowly coming into her own. And so I'm kind of excited to see how things unfold further when she gets even older. And it's going fairly slowly. I'm on page 170 because I'm slow, and also because, did I read anything else in the meantime is what I wanted to check on my, no, nothing except audios. The last book on here was Effinges, the one I finished in Germany. Of course, now I regret not having a copy of it, but that's okay. I mean, it was very good, but it's fine. And then, let me try to think what I should talk about next. Let me talk about the other non-audio that I'm reading, and has sort of eclipsed Hild, because I'm with a couple of people that I know on Zoom, and just because we decided to do this, I am doing a reread, although it was such a long time ago. I mean, I do kind of remember it, but still, it's a very long time ago. So is it a reread? I'm rereading Magic Mountain, and my poor copy is falling. The cover came off, so now it looks like this. And of course now this is falling apart too. So I need to kind of, not quite sure how to do this. I'm not very good at fixing things. I'm just going to make it more and more broken. I might just have to buy a new copy. Maybe I'll just buy the same type and same copy. Anyway, so I've started it, and it's absolutely fantastic. And if you know, you know. So he wrote this, Thomas Mann wrote this one in the 30s, I believe, after World War I, but it's about the pre-time before World War I, and about the 7 years that Castorp, our hero, spends in this sanatorium for tuberculosis, the Magic Mountain. And what, in a very basic way, obviously from the title, and also how in the first sort of pages of the novel, Man evokes this idea of, even on the train, Hans feels like he's going out of the normal world and up into the world of the mountains, and he makes a big deal out of noticing when the tree line stops and there's no more trees growing, and how in the beginning it's all about how that affects his mood or his disposition. And there's this sort of very intricate and nuanced back and forth between physical disposition and physical ailments of the body itself, and how its sort of predicaments and its sicknesses, and how it's sort of intertwined with mood and mental dispositions, I guess. And what he's so good at, Man, in the beginning, is setting up Kustov as a character who, on the one hand, is kind of annoying. He's annoying in his, but we sort of see why he's that way. He's, in a certain sense, Kustov is pretty basic. He's a basic, well-to-do young man who's studying to be a shipbuilder from Hamburg, so from the upper class of Hamburg. But his sort of, the sadness to his story is that he lost his parents and then his grandfather, which is kind of described kind of in an interesting way while he was young, especially the parents when he was very young, and then the grandfather when he wasn't much older, and then he goes to live with someone else, another relative, and so he's sort of this orphan, but well-to-do orphan, and sort of the coping mechanisms he develops to get by in a world that is this way for him. And so he's not sort of an intellectual, he's not particularly introspective. And he's going to the sanatorium to visit his cousin, who really is, and I don't remember him, he's much less well known when in the reread, but who really is quite ill, and whose sort of position in the beginning is the person who knows the ins and outs of the sanatorium really well, and is sort of showing them to the newcomer. And Hans is the newcomer, and also the fairly healthy person, supposedly. And we already see how he's not feeling. He's kind of he seems overheated. And I just read this funny, sort of weird, sad section where he goes on and on about how much he loves to smoke, and it's so much to do with the addiction aspect. He says he really wouldn't know what to do with himself if he woke up and couldn't smoke. And of course, the cousin doesn't smoke, and of course, these are people with tuberculosis. So, and it's funny because, as far as I know, Thomas Mann was, a passionate smoker too, and you always see him with the picture. It's so much a part of the culture. It reminds me of my student who did research on representation of smoking in German film, and you could do it in books too. But he's a bit of an idiot, Hans, and he's also. You see what Mann is also doing. He's a little bit sort of oblivious to poor Joachim and his illness, but it's also to do with the fact that they're young men, and this is how they interact with each other. They're not effusive in their how they feel about things or each other, whatever. And so quite a bit of repression going on, and even with each other, they're not. Like, he never says, "Oh, I hope you're okay," or he never seems to sort of show concern for the fact that Joachim isn't that well. But I'm still very much at the beginning, and it's just excellent writing. The thing that keeps you going with Mano, keeps me going, is how well he writes, and how at times funny. It's very funny. It's very humorous. It's very ironic. It's just when he gets people saying stuff to each other, or talking, or setting the scene of people talking, it's absolutely, there's no one better, in my opinion. No one is better. And so I am really enjoying it. I have a kind of a number of pages I have to meet every day, a quota, so that I can catch up to when my two readers that I'm reading with. We're going to meet again in a little bit later in August, and I will catch up to where they are, and then we'll move on. And of course, there are other big issues going on that I could talk more about when I continue chatting with you about it. The issue of time and the passage of time and the subjective experience of time. Sort of, it's rushes and it's either stops or it goes very fast, and he does the same thing in the novel. So apparently the first chapters are very, very detailed descriptions of a few days, and then it kind of speeds up. And so but this whole time thing will be another big topic to talk about later on. So it's going really well, but it does mean, because I'm not a heavy reader, I should be able to do more than, I should be able to read Zauberberg and then some of this as well, but it hasn't worked out that way as much. I mean, a little bit maybe, but not as much as I want to. So while I hadn't committed to reading Zauberberg, Magic Mountain, I was reading Hild, and then I also picked up L.M.Montgomery's on Kindle, The Blue Castle. So the famous author of Anne of Green Gables, and she is an interesting person, but her writing style. I was thinking about this when I was reading it. She's like a good bad writer. Like, her writing isn't that good, and it's sort of overly sentimental. It's almost formulaic somewhat, and in Blue Castle you kind of see this. It's in the beginning, it's very negative, but it does kind of pull you in. It's just, it doesn't have a lot of literary, what's the word, value. It's, in my opinion, I'm sorry, it's just the way I feel. But she's a fascinating person, and she led a very sad life, married to this poor, very mentally, basically fragile man who she had to sort of pretend that things were better than they actually were. So very interesting life, and the writing. I mean, I was sort of I would have finished the novel. See, I DNF'd it because of not really needing to know how it ends and seeing how it probably would end. It's like a fantasy. It's a fairy tale-esque novel of this poor woman who's very put upon in the beginning, and who decides she's not afraid of everyone, and kind of rebels against her stifling family, they're all awful, and everyone is awful except apparently this one person that she's falling for is not awful. So it's sort of, it's very sort of fairy tale type writing. And it doesn't even have the redeeming qualities of Anne, which, I mean, I think was a little bit, I don't know where it falls in terms of where she wrote it, but it was okay. I mean, it was fine. Anyway, but it did kind of make me think about women's writing of the same era. And it also reminded me of, back a little bit earlier before Germany, I had read Booth Tarkington's novel, Alice Adams, so it's complicated, because on one hand, he is a better writer, I think. And I did like how he foregrounded this female character who's very sort of upbeat, but his racism was grating. His incessant sort of dwelling on just the way he would describe the African American experience and African Americans was completely distasteful, and not just in the sort of, we have to kind of just take it because it's what it is. It's beyond that, in my opinion. I mean, it's probably like how I don't think I could read Gone with the Wind anymore. And it all takes place in Indiana, and it won the Booker Prize. It was not the Booker, the Pulitzer. Sorry. It was well thought of, but it was sort of, this was well thought. I mean, I could sort of see, it was, because I mean, racism back then, and 2026 was still dealing with it. So that was a bit off-putting. It was very popular and made into a movie with Katharine Hepburn. And so the sort of the women's perspective, either as a character or novels written by women. And then you have the Canadian Montgomery. And then a while back, a student had mentioned it, and it's come up before. I really need to read The Yellow Wallpaper, this famous novella about a woman who's sort of being kept in a room because she's unwell, and it kind of backfires completely, as I know. So and I got that on Kindle, so I'll try and read that quickly at some point. And it's a whole theme, the sort of, I think that's a bit early. I think that's 19th century still. I'm not sure. I have to see where the timeline falls. Anyway, so moving into my audiobooks. So the one audiobook that I'll try and put a cover in, I finished listening to Michael Pollan's, I think it's called, what is it called? A World Appears or something? The book about consciousness. I think that's what, A World Appears. And he has the curtain there on the cover. Michael Pollan, he's very prolific, very sort of nice fellow, intellectual journalist type who's written all these books about food mainly. And I remember trying to read Omnivore's Dilemma and quite a while ago and being a little bit bored with it, even though it's my issues with journalistic nonfiction. I don't know, even though it's an interesting topic. The only other one, Pollan, that I've listened to is the one, did I listen to the one about coffee? He has all these self-experiments about stopping coffee and then coming back to it and how, but this was really good. It was, I'm interested in the concept, consciousness, because basically for the same reason he's interested in it. It's the basic question is, what is it, and why can't we explain better what it is? And the gap between the sort of scientific synapses firing and brain stuff, and then the idea of an internal world that appeals to us and that is connected to our identity and who we are and how we see ourselves. And we don't really have a good explanation for where it comes from, its origin story or whatever. It's sort of unexplainable. And he talks about the infamous, if you know, you know, hard question. I think that's what it's called, the hard question of consciousness. From David Chalmers, who's the one who set up this. He's a philosopher who set up this idea that there's a gap between what we can explain in terms of the science and the extremely ornate and fascinating, creative and individual life of inexperience. And I think Pollan does a good job of giving the scientists their due, but then also kind of where I would fall, showing the shortcomings of the scientific explanation and how it doesn't really account for the richness. Everything is worth, living for in terms of art and books and reading, and is not really accounted for in the purely scientific descriptions of consciousness. It doesn't, there is a gap there. And so the gap is filled by all these people who have different interpretations of what it is. There's coming from the other side, there's the panpsychists who think that everything has consciousness, which is a little hard to envision how that's supposed to work, but maybe, I don't know. And then I'm not doing a good job of all the other places he goes with this. And he ends in a really nice sort of, we just have to accept, kind of like a sort of Buddhist, meditation, and the fact that there are people have experiences that change their ideas about consciousness, and that and it sort of comes down to the notion of, are we all connected to a sort of universal type of consciousness or not? And the sort of boundaries, that we put on ourself and our identities. Are we? Is it all just one sort of? And he does talk a lot about. I think his previous book is his experience taking mushrooms, and he had this. I guess he had this experience where he was in his yard and he had this was talking to plants, like he had a kind of plant trip where he was sort of convening with the plants. And I guess the idea of plant consciousness is a big one. And then, sentience and the difference between all the shades of all of the where you can go. And so I did kind of like it. It's not very, it's a sort of pleasant listen. It doesn't sort of shake you or anyway. And it overlaps with a lot of my interests. One of my main interests that I want to pursue is thinking about memory, and he just sort of talks a little bit about how important memory is for consciousness, and in a way, it's how we our consciousness is connected so closly to our memories, especially specific, like our identities as people, as unique individuals, whatever that means. And he also gives literature its due. He has a nice section where he talks about, and he talks with people like the author of Duck's New Report, L.M., I think Lucy L.M., and that's a book that I liked but couldn't finish reading. It was making me anxious for some reason, the dumping of information. I just couldn't find a way to comfortably read it. But it's a good choice. He's sort of using it as an example of a literary take on what is consciousness. So very, very interesting. And I have another interest that is sort of, it's not as closely connected, but I have an interest in Gaia theory, the theory that self-regulating systems, and that the planet Earth is a self-regulating system, which is apparently kind of accepted now that is the case. And I think there's sort of, you see connecting points to the idea of everything is conscious, or sort of universal consciousness. I won't say anything more about that because I haven't prepared anything. I haven't really been reading up on that right now in this moment, so I'll let that go for now. This is going to be a long video, I apologize. Moving into, so the last audio, the one I just started after finishing Pollan, is after sort of thinking a little bit about what I want to listen to. I always like to listen to a book that I actually own, and I went with a classic that I don't know if I've actually ever read this, Robinson Crusoe by Daniel Defoe, which is great. It's this poor fellow, Robinson, who's on his island now, and he's doing interesting things with, he describes what he's doing in the beginning, and then finally he gets pen and paper, and then he kind of redescribes it as a journal. So it's just a narrative shift. And of course, this is an early novel. This is this 17th century when he wrote this? I think it's pretty early, right? Crusoe, 1719, okay, 18th century. Very influential novel. I mean, to this day, I remember that in the German context, I haven't read any, there was this thing called the Robinsonade, so Robinson-esque tales that were very popular. So it has a sort of adventure, it's the adventure novel, platonic ideal of an adventure novel. And then, of course, there's other things going on. He's sort of finally deciding he needs to read the Bible, and he's starting to pray, and he's having sort of quasi-religious philosophical thoughts. And it's good to listen to or read, to interact with, because then you realize what happened before he got to the island. Like there's a whole section of him with his young protege or quasi-slave, I'm not quite sure. No, maybe it's just a servant who works for him. And they have a sort of, and he goes to Brazil for a while. I mean, a whole bunch of things happen before he ends up on the island, which is kind of good because it gives you a sense that he's not completely, he has had quite a few life experiences, and then he ends up on the island. And then all the island stuff happens. So this is a nice, and it's also a book that you can just listen to and not sort of freak out because you're not getting everything. Although I do find myself, so the way I listen to books, I am a little bit, I'll just, if I've noticed that I missed a section that I want to listen to, I will stop and rewind. So I stop and rewind quite a bit when I'm doing my household chores. I don't just let it go, not with this one. Some other books I might just let it go, but with him, just holding forth on what he's doing, I want to get it straight so I understand things. I think one of my favorite tiny sections was when he describes the goats that he finds, and how when they are up, when he's up top and they're down below, they get very afraid of him. I think that's how it works. Or was the other way around? But then when they're up top and he's below, they don't even see him. Like their vision is so focused on, is it a predator? And the predators would have to be above him, I think. Something about it's an example, I mean, coming out of the consciousness book, of how limited, in terms of their survival, they only need to be able to see him well from one angle, one perspective, and the other one, because it's not that important, or it's so unusual for someone to be there, their vision is limited by what they need to be able to survive. It's an example of, I don't know, adaptive Darwinian type stuff, but I kind of like that little tidbit of the goats. At the end here, just a quick overview of a couple of books that have come into the Grimm library as it were, and we'll reach over. The first are kind of two great finds from the little free library. So in an effort to walk more, which is only going so, I managed to walk to my free little library, and I was so excited to find The Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler, who's I only know Kindred, and so this one looks really interesting. It's a nice edition, pristine, with an introduction by Gloria Steinem. I'm like, yeah, I'll take that. And then even more sort of a little surprising is, I don't know if this is on the long list or not, but it's the new George Saunders, or I think it's the new one, called Vigil, which I had only recently heard. I've been dipping into a few videos regarding the Booker, and I don't know, is it on the long list? I mean, he won already. But it's also kind of slim, so that's a plus for me. Plus, he's a great writer, so I thought, well, that's kind of a bargain. These are two nice hardcover books for nothing, and I will, when the weather's better and I'm up for it, I will take them some books. My library is still in flux. There's a lot of books in the garage that I need to sort of find homes for or give away. And then here are the last two things are books from reviews that I saw on, I think, TikTok or YouTube. And the first person, I'll link him. He's a Canadian reviewer, and he's very good. He reads really interesting stuff. But he highly recommended this. He's a Lebanese writer, but I think this is about Palestine, or yeah, I'm pretty sure it's the book of the Palestinian, an epic of the Palestinian people. So translated by Humphrey Davis. First published in 1998. So yeah, okay. So he really raved about Gates of the Sun by Elias Khoury. So I thought I would get that. And then on a whim, because I found another TikToker who's a very sort of older gentleman who just kind of very sort of without much, he just kind of goes into what a book is about. And it sounded fascinating. It's my kind of weird book. It's about, it takes place in Algeria, Jose Eduardo Agualusa's, and I just love this title. It's my type of title, A General Theory of Oblivion. And this is about a lady who basically stays inside because she's agoraphobia. And but then I've read that some people hate this book. Some people think it's, I don't know, but I will find out for myself. And I like how they're both from the same publisher, Archipelago, but they're quite different in size. This is way bigger. So these are just two new, kind of trying to be a little bit spreading out from my comfort zone. Doesn't have to always be Trollope, but you know. So translated from the Portuguese by Daniel Hahn, and this is translated from the Arabic by Humphrey Davis. So we will put them on the TBR, and at some point I might come in and talk a little bit more about what my plans are. I am a little bit held back by my slowness, so I need to sort of try and figure out and be okay with that, and figure out a quota and sort of not freak out by that. The main goal is to not freak out, which is not so easy when you're me. I think we'll get stop it there because it has been rather long. I hope everyone's fine, and I'm going to try and get better about watching more YouTube, BookTube. I do watch, but I don't always comment, so there is that. Anyway, have you anything to say about my reads and my books that I'm looking into? And hopefully you're all doing well, and I apologize for the length, and I'll be back fairly soon. Bye.